Chapter 6. A Wedding and a Tragedy. The captain of the Dutch trading vessel Eindracht must have been a crusty old fellow with little romance in his heart. He was not very far-sighted either, but of course he could not have suspected that an unsympathetic word of his would finally result in the loss of New Amsterdam to the Dutch. Yet his no was like striking a match to a fuse. The Eindracht, carrying furs from New Amsterdam to Holland, had put into the English port of Plymouth, and would have sailed out again without adventure had the pilot not asked the captain for a delay in order that he might marry. When the captain refused, the pilot saw a way out in appealing to the provost of the port to detain the ship, suggesting that a Dutch vessel had no business to be trading in English territory. We do not know if the pilot's marriage turned out happily or not, but we do know that the English seized the Eindracht and that the matter got into the courts, calling official attention very sharply to the fact that the Dutch were holding territory claimed by the English under the terms of the King James grant to the Plymouth Company in 1606. The English decided to push forward their colonizing until the time should come for a contest. In 1635, King Charles I made a grant of Long Island to Alexander, Lord Stirling, and more English settlers crossed the seas to dispute with the Dutch the rights to New Netherland. There was still a great deal of room, but as the two peoples had come with the intention of elbowing each other, it was not long before they began to do so. The English planted settlements in the eastern end of Long Island and pushed westward. The Dutch settled the western end and for a long time sat tight. They watched each other closely, like the jealous rivals they were, but it was years before the clash came. Meanwhile, the Dutch continued to set up a little Holland on Manna-Hatin Island. They built tall, gabled Dutch houses near their Dutch canal, smoked their long-stemmed pipes on the wooden benches by the side of their Dutch doorways, and argued emphatically in guttural Dutch words. They listened to the sermons of Dominie Bogardus in the little wooden church that succeeded the horse-mill loft, and they sent their boys and girls to Adam Rowlandson, the first school-teacher. Adam was not a huge success at teaching, and presently tried to piece out his income by renting a bleaching ground beside the pond where the buxom Dutch maids washed the household linen. The little country path down which they came with their bundles winds today between tall skyscrapers, yet it still bears the name of Maiden Lane. Wouter van Twiller had become governor following the recall of Minuit, and while he made little money for the company, he did pretty well for himself. Among other properties, he purchased Nut Island from the Canarsie Indians, establishing there a bowery or farm which he cultivated at the company's expense and to his own profit. Therefore, it became known as Governor's Island. Finally, the company wearied of this one-sided thrift and replaced Van Twiller, only to send out in his place a meddlesome little busybody named Kieft, who managed during the years of his rule to bring disaster upon the entire colony. Nearly all of William Kieft's policies were unwise, but it was in his dealings with the Indians that he did the greatest harm. In 1640, some pigs were stolen on Staten Island by servants of the West India Company, as it appeared later. Without proving his suspicions, Kieft at once sent an expedition against the innocent Raritans. In the bitter feelings stirred up by this injustice, the Wekwaiskeek Indian boy, who had fled from his uncle's assailants by the freshwater pond, at last found his chance to strike. His victim was Claes Switz, a wheelwright who lived near Turtle Bay. There was a witness to his act, and Kieft demanded that his tribe surrender him. This they refused to do, and the long years of Indian warfare began. It was in 1643, during this period of terror, that Kieft was responsible for the most dastardly and bloody act in the history of New York. The powerful Mohawks came down the river to collect tribute from the Wekwaiskeeks, and as they came armed, the weaker tribe fled for protection to Pavonia and Corlear's Hook. Their very trust in the white man betrayed them, for in the dead of night Kieft sent his soldiers to slaughter the refugees, women and children, as well as the braves. David de Vries, a patroon of Staten Island and a man of great wisdom in Indian affairs, had done his best to prevent the massacre, and all night he sat in the fort helpless and horror-stricken, listening to the cries that drifted from the Jersey shore across the ominous stillness of the river. Toward morning, an Indian and his wife, who had escaped from what they thought were the Mohawks, came knocking at the gate, pleading to be taken in. De Vries sadly told them the truth and helped them to rejoin the Waquaskik tribe. The penalty for Kieft's act was shared by the whole colony. 11 tribes of Indians went on the warpath, and the shores resounded with their yells. Before long, Staten Island as well as Pavonia lay in ashes about the mutilated bodies of white men. Only fortified New Amsterdam and a few settlements on Long Island were left in the possession of the white intruders. As for De Vries and the friends who fled to his manor for refuge during the devastation of Staten Island, they were most dramatically saved by the appearance of the very Indian whom he had helped to escape from the fort on the night of the massacre. Kieft's efforts at making peace were unsuccessful, and at last Captain John Underhill, an English officer who had settled at Stamford, came to the rescue of the colony. His raid on the headquarters of the Connecticut Indians brought the bloody period to a close, and New Amsterdam was saved. But not for Kieft. The citizens had addressed a remonstrance to the States General of Holland, and the West India Company was forced to recall the unpopular governor. William Kieft never reached Holland to answer the charges, however, for the ship Princess, on which he and Dominie Bogardus took passage in 1647, sank in the English Channel, and both men were drowned.